What is the most smart-ass thing you've said to a cop without getting a ticket? Got pulled over on my motorcycle. Cop. Do you know why I pulled you over? Me. Cause I wasn't wearing my seatbelt. He got a chuckle and I only got a warning. Next cop didn't find it nearly as amusing. Cop. Were you eating an apple while driving? Me. Can't I eat while I drive? Cop. No. Me. But I can smoke. Cop. Yes. Me. Then I was smoking the apple. Yelling at a cop for calling me Jack Sparrow instead of Captain Jack Sparrow. Whilst heavily intoxicated and dressed as Captain Jack Sparrow. We were in a car park just off the motorway in a Toyota MR2. Police pulled in and got out their car. One of the officers put his hand on the hood of the MR2 and said, "Bonnet's a bit hot. Been ragging it, have we?" I replied, "Funny that, mate. It's rear engine." The second officer found it hilarious. The first looked incredibly embarrassed. Did you see the speed limit sign? Yes, I just didn't see you sitting behind it. I'll never forget how hard he scrunched his face up trying not to laugh. I tried to call the police to report a crime, but it was not an emergency. A guy was walking around my neighborhood, obviously casing houses. I called the police department after hours and couldn't get a hold of anyone. I passed a cop while driving and sped past him so that he would pull me over. When he said, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" I said, "Yeah, because I wanted you to so I could actually talk to an officer." He went and found the guy and arrested him because he had a warrant out on him. I once pulled myself over after I blew through a red light. Since there was a cop right there, I was a new driver. Saw him and freaked out. He asked me why he shouldn't write me a ticket. And I told him I really don't want you to. Got off with a warning. Can you say your alphabet to J for me? Which one of you dudes is J? He told me how much over the limit I was going and I said, "Well, you looked bored sitting there, so I figured I'd give you something to do." Laughed and let me off the whole thing with a warning. I work nights, so the cops will occasionally cruise through our parking lot in the middle of nowhere and just check things out. I was outside on my break smoking and playing Jetpack Joyride when they lowered their window. "What are you doing here at this time of night?" My f-king job. "What are you doing here at this time of night?" Our f-king jobs. Have a nice night. You too. Montreal cops are nice. Despite their silly pants. He asked me if I had a dead body in my back seat. I said, "Oh. Totally. You wanna meet him? He's kinda shy." He laughed. Told his partner he said totally. Took my license. Sat in their car for a minute. Then drove up next to me. Handed me my cards from their window. And drove off. I later realized that a coat and hat were on top of a mess in my backseat and actually could have looked like a dead body. Friend got pulled over doing about 20 over. We were college kids at the time. Officer walks over to the window, does his normal "Do you know why I pulled you over?" routine, and then turns to me when it's all done and asks, "So should I give your friend here a ticket?" With a smile I said, "Yes sir. He most likely deserves it." Cop laughed, smiled and walked away. In college once thanked a cop for not being a dickhead about it. You know. Like most officers are after getting ticketed. He wrote it all down and the judge repeated that to me when I fought the ticket in court. She was clearly amused and I got out of the ticket. Years ago. During a heavy drug-fueled bender at a London festival. I walked up to some policemen and said, "Guess what I'm on?" They smirked and told me to move on. Driving through Kansas City I got pulled over. I was wearing a Twins cap. Cop said something about being ready to give me a warning. But then he saw my cap. I said, "Hey. It's not like the Royals and Twins have been good at the same time." He said he's actually a Cubs fan and I couldn't stop myself from saying, "Oh. I'm sorry." He laughed and gave me a warning. I was flying back from Europe once. At the Brussels airport I bought a jar of mustard in duty free. They sealed it in the special bag. Put it in my carry-on. Get it through customs no problem. Bringing it back through TSA in the US. At a major international airport it gets confiscated. It is in a sealed jar. In a sealed bag. Having clearly been bought at an airport and just brought through an international border. TSA guy confiscates it. Told him to keep saving the country one jar of mustard at a time. Got pulled up very for wearing headphones as a hands-free device. Apparently doing that is illegal in PA. He said it was because then you can't hear sirens, so I replied, then why can deaf people get driver's licenses? Double quote. No. Sir. I don't know how fast I was going. I'm late for my best friend's wedding. Double quote. Turned out though, he was the elder brother of a good friend from high school. So he threw his lights on and gave me an escort to the wedding. Got there on time thanks to speeding. Close bracket. My brother and I. Both underage. Both very drunk. Walking home with a dozen donuts and the remains of a six-pack when the cops saw us mostly stumbling along the main road. They pulled around behind us. And scared the pants off us with the siren. One cop got out of the car. And asked us where we were going. We offered him our donuts. He took our beer. Joke was on him. It was Bud Light. They left us to continue our own way home. Don't think we'd get away with that today. My sister called the cops on me because she was drunk. Long story. Not getting into details, but she used to want to build a case for getting me kicked out of the house left to both of us when our parents died. So the cops came and were clearly on her side before they even spoke to me. I asked them why they didn't assess the situation first. Talk to both of us and then figure out what was going on instead of taking her side right away. The cop literally said we take the side of the person who called us to the scene. Double quote. So I looked at copy Mr. Copperson and said, okay. So why don't you leave? Go down to Dunkin' Donuts and I'll call you back and then you can take my side or at least even listen to me. Double quote. For suspected DUI, I was not drunk at all. After about 15-20 minutes of field sobriety tests. Cop. Do you know the difference between being intoxicated and being impaired? Do you know which one you are? Double quote. Me. One of them involves me having at least a back of 0.8 in the state of NY and the other is a synonym you want me to admit to so you can take me in even though I passed all your sobriety tests. Double quote. Cop. Long pause, you can go. But I'm blasting out your license plate number. And if somebody else sees you so much as switch lanes without signaling, they will book you. Double quote. Dude was a f***ing dick. I got pulled over on a backcountry road in one of the most white affluent counties in NH. This was during the Ferguson riots. The 25-year-old, squeaky clean homebred white boy got out of the cruiser and came up to my window. He asked, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Me in all of my Irish heritage paleness replied, "Well, if I had to guess, I'd say racial profiling." He paused for a second and then burst out with a laugh. The cops flat out accused me of being high and having weed on me. I didn't. I was so flabbergasted that they would accuse me like that. I didn't deny having weed. Cue the 20-minute search for the weed on me while I laughed my ass off saying cold. Cold? Warmer. They asked me why I wasted their time at the end. I told them they shouldn't make assumptions and shouldn't waste my time. He had a big Olay 1980s mustache and aviator shades on. I asked if he nose came off with the stash and glasses. You know the whole chapel bit about I didn't know I couldn't do that? Basically that was speeding. Although I didn't know I was speeding because there wasn't a sign for miles. In a construction zone. Officer pulled me over and told me how since it's a construction zone, the ticket could have been so much worse than just a regular speeding ticket. I said I didn't know that was a thing. I mean, I know there's normally signage saying men at work, slow down or something of that nature. But number 1, no signs giving me a speed limit, and number 2, nobody working. As far as I was concerned, I was driving the normal speed limit, as I was unaware that it had dropped. I didn't know I couldn't do that got me out of like a $700 ticket. Because he let me off with a warning. Buddy of mine is a cop and was at a concert doing security. As in he walked in uniform under the pretense of establishing a presence to dissuade unlawful activity. He just wanted to see Metallica. Anyway he's there and some guy lights up a joint right next to him. Turns. Looks at him. And the exchange goes. Comma oh shit. A cop. Relax. Comma really. But this is. Tobacco. It's a hand-rolled tobacco cigarette. Comma no it's not. Yes. It is. Comma on. Do you want some? Get the FCK away from me. Them. You were driving 20 miles below the speed limit. Me. Yes them. Why? Me. A cop was following me. I was leaving work late on a Friday night and got pulled over for a random breath test. The cop asked me if I'd been drinking and I said no. Asked where I'd been and I gave him the raised eyebrow and said work. Asked where I was at I was working so late so I just completely silently looked down at my uniform and name badge and back up at him with the really? Face. Stay safe out there. Okay. Double quote. 16 years old. Walking back to work from my lunch break. Smoking a cigarette. Cop pulls up beside me. I walk up to his window. Yes sir? You got a light? Sure. Pull out my Zippo. Light his cigarette for him. Brain telling me I'm underage and smoking so be cool. Be cool. Say something casual. So in my wisdom I say I always light my bitches cigarettes. I immediately freeze. He just chuckles and drives off. A party got busted when I was in college. A majority of the attendees were underage. The cocky campus policeman walked up and said well. Looks like we're going to be checking IDs and handing out underages tonight. Immediately after saying this, his 19-year-old daughter walked out. I was sitting on the porch and said still want those IDs? Double quote. I expect you're going to sell me a ticket to the policeman's ball? I offered the officer a donut from the box on my front seat when he pulled me over, due to a burned out tail light. He took two. And gave me a warning to get it fixed ASAP. I was riding my motorcycle away from the traffic lights at a speed allowed in the area. Admittedly my engine revved rather loud. Police officer I have stopped you for speeding me. I wasn't speeding. Police officer I could tell by the sound of our engine you were speeding me that's absurd. Are you trying to tell me you can tell what speed something is going by the noise police officer yes me. Okay. Pointed at plane flying overhead what's speed's that going then? No ticket. But he wasn't very amused. I worked at the NCO club on an AF base as a teenager. I was a cook sometimes and a dishwasher. I blew through a stop sign and was speeding. Apparently I was being lit up and chased and didn't realize it until I saw the gate closing as I was trying to get off base. The security forces, AFMP, asked me a bunch of questions about it and I told him I wasn't paying attention due to my eating cheesy fries I made sitting in the passenger seat. Then I asked do you want some? He stared at me for a second and told me to leave. Excuse me officer. Would you like to see my dick? Seriously. I have no idea why I wasn't arrested or at least accosted. Sure. I was standing in my yard. But I was underage and obviously drunk. Pulled over for quickly accelerating after a traffic light. When the cop asked why, I said it was to try to get away from the asshole with their brights on. He then turned to see he still had his brights on. And said have a safe drive home. I didn't know I couldn't do that. Driving a 1990 Mercury Sable. Dented and miscolored. Do you have any large denominations of US currency with you? Double quote. Was it the flashy car that tipped you off? Double quote. Was 17. Pulled over for speeding on the freeway. The cop found a bowl and some weed in my car. I'm sitting in the front seat of the police car and he says, Give me one reason to not take you to jail right now. My mind was racing looking for an excuse, but I couldn't think of anything, so I blurted out, I can't think of a single reason. He laughed and said, that is the smartest thing you could have said. He then made me dump out the weed and throw my bowl into the road sidewoods and wrote me a speeding ticket. I always call an officer by his name but always pronounce it a little wrong. The best one was when I called Officer Smith. Officer Sith. He kept telling me to pronounce it correctly and I happily obliged to Mr. Sith. He was so fed up with my tiny bit of smartassery that he told me, and I quote, "You're really starting to piss me off, son. Get the FCK out of here before I have a stroke. No ticket for speeding. For the record, this is something you really shouldn't do because this isn't meant to get out of anything, but it sure as hell is fun." Copper. What's that for? Me. For rolling my joints. Copper. Do you have weed? Me. Nah. I just finished my last joint. Ran out. It's a pain in the ass. Copper with a shocked face. What? Me. I said I've ran out and it's a pain in the ass. To be fair, the copper was being a dick. He walked into my house without permission and refused to leave and was being very aggressive. His partner just stood there with a WTF not again face. And being stoned isn't against the law. But being in possession is. In college the cops came by because we were being too loud in our apartment. No complaint. They were driving by and heard it. The cop asked for ID. We were all 21 and there were only 6 or so of us. One of my roommates was a DCK when he got drunk and just said, "I'm sorry officer. I didn't realize I needed a license to operate this motor vehicle." Cop asks if we know what the noise ordinance is and he responds with 90 decibels. No. There is no decibel threshold. Well, there should be. Ended up with just a warning. Well, this W was during processing. So already arrested. I had to take my barbells out of my ears. They've not been out in the 5 years they've been pierced. They asked how they were going to come out. I said, well, first, you have to grasp the bar, S. Then you have to work the shaft. Double quote. They all stopped and laughed at the guy that was grasping said balls. Good times. The same year I got my license, 17. I noticed that a cop car that was driving around town had one of the front lights missing. So I turned around and flashed my high beams at him and he pulled over. I then went out of my car, walked up to him and asked him if he knew his light was out. He got out to check and thanked me for letting him know. Not really a big deal. But pulling a cop over because his light was out must give some baddest points. I was driving in Boston headed to a Bruins game and I missed the damn turn for the parking garage. Didn't see any cops, so I decided to make an illegal U-turn at the next light. Sure enough, lights go on behind me and I get pulled over. The officer comes up to my window and hits me with the "Do you know why I pulled you over?" I said, "Yeah. 'Cause I'm an asshole." After a good laugh and a warning, he told me to go be an asshole on the other side of the city. Not to a cop directly, but he was there and listening. I was frustrated at our checkpoint about the ever-changing policies on what can and cannot be carried, which also varies airport to airport if I may add, and at the culmination of the conversation, out of pure frustration, I informed them of a statistic that I was aware of. At this point I was not being confrontational. Instead I was trying to spotlight the lunacy of it all, and I said this while looking at the officer. "You let him through with a gun. Did you know that in the US you are 8 times more likely to be killed by a cop than a terrorist?" He had already focused his attention over to me. We made eye contact. Smiled and he chuckled and shrugged his shoulders. TSA was not quite as entertained, but they let me go. I was pulled over a few years ago while driving 90 plus mph on a highway where the speed limit was 55. Cop pulls me over, walks up to my window and asks for license, insurance and registration. After I hand over my information, he asks if I knew how fast I was traveling. I responded with "I don't know. 90? Dot." He then asks me if I knew what the speed limit on Woodhaven Road was. I responded with "I don't know. Not 90. The officer thanked me for my honesty and let me off with a warning. I feel like I was kind of being a smartass because I was going to get a ticket anyway, but turns out I was just being honest. This didn't get me out of a ticket, but it gave the cop a pretty good laugh. He asked why I was going 52 in a 35 and I told him general lack of awareness. Was my first time getting pulled over and asked for his autograph. I didn't even have my license yet, learner's permit, but I was late to school and my mom kept telling me to hurry. When I got pulled over, the cop told me I was doing 53 in a 35. I looked at him and said dyslexia? He was not amused. But he didn't give me any shit for being a smartass. A bit of the opposite. As I was the cop and it's what the person said to me that had me chuckling. If I remember correctly, it was for a probation parole search and nothing was located. So he was not arrested. I have always had a younger appearance, baby face, one could say. Anyways, I was only standing around as a backup officer. As the other officer searched the parolee, he looks at me and says, "Does your mama know you're out here playing cop?" He said it in an irritating tone. 2. Which enhanced the smartness of it. Parolees have some of the best one-liners you will ever hear. A lot of them are quick-witted and funny as hell. Anyways, thanks to that jackass. Babyface was my nickname for way too long. I've sassed Border Patrol going into the States a few times. I love when they accept it though. The one time my so and I were going over to go shoe shopping and he asked what we were doing. I told him shoe shopping. He asked why. And I said, "'Cause we have no shoes." He just nodded and said, "Yeah. I deserve that. Go on through." Double quote. I once got pulled over by a motorcycle cop on the freeway, state trooper. I was doing about 8 over. And in my state, anything less than 10 over is a $25 ticket for wasting gas. I figured the worst I was going to get was a $25 fine. So I figured I'd see if I could get some police brutality to go with it. He walked up to the window and asked me if I knew why he pulled me over. My immediate response, without thinking, was, "Well, considering how dressed up you are in those smart boots and that dapper little hat, I have to imagine you wanted to ask me to dinner." The cop stared agog at me for a moment, walked back to his bike, and sped away with not another word spoken. I'm a burly, bearded guy, by the way. I once got pulled over for going 50 in a 45-mile-per-hour zone. Only reason he tagged me was because I had a ricer that was pretty loud when I hit the gas. Giving the impression of great speed, it wasn't a very fast car. When he caught up to me, I was already out of my car walking into the market. He whipped his cruiser in front of me and told me I was being ticketed for speeding. I said I haven't the slightest clue what you're talking about. I've been here for 20 minutes and I came back out to grab my wallet, which was a lie. He couldn't do anything because I was already out of my car by the time he caught up to me. Anyway, he told me to sell my car immediately because you won't get away next time I see you. Ironically, the car broke down a week later and I had to sell it. Cop catches me relieving my bladder behind a dumpster in an alley whilst drunk on a night out. An emergency situation. Cop. What are you doing there, son? Me. Sorry, mate. I couldn't wait any longer. Cop. Would you mind stepping into the back of the van? Me. Why? Is there a toilet in the back of there? Cop just laughed and gave me a warning. I don't think you'll ever be as lucky again in my life. I was pulled over for speeding. I rolled down my window and before he could say anything I said, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" He laughed and said, "I was about to ask you that." I said, "Well, I have no idea why." And he said, "I clocked you at 77 and a 55. I told him I clocked you at least at 90 catching up to me. He gave me a warning and told me to slow down. Drunk and high off my ass in Eindhoven. 2 officers standing watch making sure there weren't any fights and whatnot. Walked up to the guys and said, "Hey pretty, you come here often?" They told me they did and that I should just carry on with my happy evening. My stupid ass went, "So can I buy you a drink?" They told me they couldn't ask me for a drink, especially because I'm a guy, so I went and brought them 2 cokes and asked, "So, your place or mine?" They laughed, took the cokes, shook my hand and sent me on my way telling me I could sleep at their place if I got into a fight. I can't remember much else of that night, but my friends keep telling me this story and how scared they were I'd get myself arrested. What you got in the igloo cooler? Double quote. Eskimos. Double quote. Drunkenly asked a cop to pose for a photo with me on Canada Day and if he'd wear my goofy hat. He laughed and said no. His partner called him a bitch. It was funny. Not really appropriate for the ask, but hey. I doubt it counts, but once I accidentally let out a giant wet fart and the police officer gagged. We got pulled over for turning on a no turn on red intersection.